Hello. What is going on? How's everything going?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. I'm glad you're here doing a
Thank you.
podcast episode, so I can't complain. I'm glad you're here.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So for the people who don't know, can you give us like a slight introduction to who you are and the work that you're doing?
Yes, of course. My name is Dr. Santhi Periasamy. I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. I have a PhD in counseling psychology from Georgia State University in Atlanta. I have a undergrad and a dual degree in English and psychology from the University of Michigan. And I also went to UNC Chapel Hill and did a master's of science there in rehabilitation psychology and counseling. I've kind of done a lot. I'm a psychologist currently in Houston, and I have a private practice. I've done most of my work in college counseling centers geared towards urban universities and non traditional students. I've worked with student college population, student athletes, people who are athletic in their adult life, and as well as just the general population I deal with: depression, anxiety, trauma, eating issues, substance use, multicultural issues, family issues, and kind of do everything. I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. So I've worked in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I've worked for a heart and lung transplant team. I've done research with African American church populations, increasing fruit and vegetable intake and physical activity. I've worked in the public health arena. I've done individual client work, and I've also taught adjunct at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston. So I do a little bit of everything.
So it's safe to say that you are very qualified to talk about mental health and everything we're going to discuss moving forward, right?
I'd hope so by now. I've been doing this since 1998, so I would be hopeful that I know something, but I can't say I'm an expert.
Well, you know more than me, so that's all that matters here. I
Okay,
don't know anything, so I'm asking you the questions here.
sure.
All right. So I know one of the things that kind of get misconstrued and people don't understand is the difference between a therapist and a psychologist. So can you kind of break down what the differences are between those two?
In some ways, they're interchangeable, right? Both a therapist and a psychologist are there to help support you, facilitate growth, help you explore anything that you are struggling with, things from your past, currently, but also in the goal and effort to help you get a better future. The only distinction between the therapist and psychologist is the licensure component. So a psychologist generally has a PhD or a PsyD. That means they have a doctorate in the degree of psychology or a doctorate of philosophy in psychology. And so that means they went through more schooling. They would have done the undergrad, master's, and then a PhD program, usually anywhere between 3 to 6 years on top of their master's degree. So in that way, it's more schooling, more experience, more in-depth work in kind of whatever is your subject area or clinical area. And so that would be kind of the major distinction between a psychologist and what you generally would call an LPC, a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, someone who has a master's degree. They are also licensed, extremely qualified. They just have to go to school a little bit shorter than we do, and they may have just some limitations with their licensure, depending state to state on what they can do and what they can provide. And so that would be a little bit of the distinction. A psychologist can usually provide assessments, like psychological assessments, forensic work, that kind of thing. Sometimes in hospitals, they're more likely maybe to hire a psychologist, but the field is changing and the need for mental health is so great that you kind of can't wait for someone to go through almost 12 to 13 years of schooling before they can be a therapist. So I think that it is really valuable to have a lot of master's level professionals who are doing the work and doing the clinical work because the need is great.
So if I was, a college student and I'm looking to get some type of mental health, how would I know which route to go? Do I go to a psychologist or do I go to a therapist? How do I decide who's best for me?
The benefit of the college experience is that most people don't realize that your student fees usually pay for free therapy. So I worked a lot in college counseling centers. So, I wasn't working where the students pay me, it's just part of their student fees. Some places have free facilities, they have free counseling. Maybe they have a limit of sessions, but even if you go, anywhere between 3 to 6 sessions, then they can transfer you to people who maybe are low cost professionals and you can get an experience without, having to make a financial investment just yet. For most people, the financial investment is probably a distinction, right? Because psychologists may charge more just because of their professional um, practice and aware, experience, whereas maybe an LPC, LS, LMFT, they may charge a little bit less. I think the more distinction I would look for is someone who's a good fit for you. So if you're looking at their website, you're looking for someone who fits what you're um, seeking, right? Are they able to understand your background, who you are, where you maybe came from? Do you have a good rapport with them? Do you feel like you're heard, listened to, and validated? And that you want to feel that there's empathy. The one good thing about therapy is that you can always do an intake session, which is the first session. And a lot of people kind of feel scared because they think, oh, if I go to this one person, I have to commit long term. No, you don't. You go to the intake, you see how you feel. I would say within that 45 to 50-minute session, you will know how you feel about somebody. You'll know if you were heard, if you expressed emotion, if you feel like you went a little bit deeper than just your background information. Usually the intake's just kind of like an information session, but you will have a feeling kind of by the end that you were heard. Sometimes I say, as long as it's a general good feeling, try someone out. Therapy really doesn't work until kind of 3 to 6 sessions. So usually, unfortunately, the mode of the most common number of times people attend to see a therapist is one. They come for the intake and they never come back. And so, usually I tell people give it 3 to 6 times because that's when you get through all the information and the background, and then you'll get to the deeper places. But you'll know after the first session, generally, if you have a good connection with someone. And if you don't, you can always, just send them an email or let them know, I think I've gone in a different direction. I have a lot of people who call and say, hey, I'm looking around. I'm not sure. I've had a good feeling with this person, but I'd like to try it out. Sure, no problem. And, at the end of the day, I would rather somebody go with the best fit than just coming to me because I'm the first person they called. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. 'Cause I remember somebody saying that you have to kind of treat it like it's dating. So you wouldn't go on a first date and decide if you want to marry them or not. You go on a few dates and play around, ask them questions to get a feel for it. So, like you said, after about 3 days, you kind of get an understanding if you want to continue on, if you want to break away from it. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we have about going to see somebody about our problems. And I
And
think
I've
the
had
other one,
clients, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I've had clients sometimes feel great after 3 sessions. So it's, sometimes it's just what you're needing. it's really up to the person to kind of determine what's most valuable for them. So sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine. And I think one of the other misconceptions is kind of getting an understanding of what mental health actually is. Because I was talking to someone and they were kind of just saying how um, your mental health is when you feel bad. And I'm like, that's not the most accurate depiction. I kind of get what you're saying, but that's not the most accurate depiction of what it is. So, for your definition of your understanding, how would you explain to someone what mental health actually is?
So mental health is, I think, a commonly used term, but you're very right in that we don't always define it. We use it, we see it a lot, but we don't always define it. And when I think of mental health, I think of kind of an overall holistic well-being. How are you feeling in your social relationships, in your personal relationships, in your family relationships? How are you feeling at work or whatever is meaningful for your identity? How do you feel on a general basis? Like, do you find yourself feeling most days feeling calm, most days feeling content? Therapy and your kind of mental health is on a continuum. And so I think we're trying to achieve a balanced mental health. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be sad or stressed or anxious or, have hard times. It's more, how do we recover from them? How do we repair from them, those experiences? And maybe sometimes we need additional support to kind of peel away all the layers so we can understand what's deeper. Like, I personally come from a theoretical background where I look for patterns throughout lifetime. So I may say, like, okay, if someone is coming to me, I may say to them, tell me a little bit about what's going on for you right now. And then I might say, I often look to the past to kind of inform the present and the future. Tell me a little bit about when this pattern has come up again before, or what does this remind you of? And it's not to blame or point fingers. It's more to say, okay, is there a pattern that's been affecting us that we might not even know? And you can see that as more and more people are vocal about their mental health, especially, professional athletes and actors and actresses and people in the public eye. I think that the more and more people are vocal about it, you can see that it's not that the person is broken or something's wrong with them, or I think we use the crazy or those kinds of terms. I think what it is just that we're not feeling that balance. And so when we're not feeling that balance, everything is shifted, and everything that we do may feel like a lot of effort or feel stressful, and we want to find that homeostasis, like a good homeostasis. And so that's how I kind of think of mental health. I wonder if that's consistent with how you would describe it.
Yeah, I would too. Like you said, it's holistic. It's everything with our lives. And I try to think of analogies to make it connect with people. And I was saying how if you only could care for your mental health when things are going bad, it's like only taking a shower when you stink. It's like there's a long time between I took a shower from the last time I stink to the next time. It could be 3 or 4 days, it could be a week. I don't know how the body functions like that, but only caring for your mental health or think of mental health only when things are bad. It's a similar thing to only taking a shower when you stink because
Mm-hmm,
you could be stinking for a while, but you're not the one that smells it. So
mm-hmm.
mental health could be going bad for a while, but you're the last one to realize it. So if we could take showers daily, then we can do some things for our mental health daily because, like you said, we go to jobs, kids go to school, we're having basketball practice, basketball games, things are going on to where you're not going to train only when your game is bad. You're not only going to eat when you're hungry. It's daily things that we do, weekly things that we do. So if we can treat our mental health in that way, we will see differences in our lives. So whether that's a spiritual or very practical daily thing, we can have more improvements in our mental health. So that's kind of like an analogy or thought process I have around mental health.
That's a great analogy. I think that that's spot on in terms of really saying, like, you can maintain it in this small incremental way, or you can wait till it kind of hits a place where everybody's telling you, "Hey, you smell," and that's really applies for your work. I think because you work a lot with athletes and people who are trying to kind of improve in multiple ways. And I think if we think about it, is that a lot of times athletes will only think about what was wrong before my game and why did I do badly today, instead of looking maybe what happened 3 weeks ago, and that like small buildup, right? Of like, there's, okay, this one thing that was a disappointment, then this other thing that was a disappointment, and this other thing. And then you're there in this high pressure situation where everybody's looking at you to perform, and that anxiety and performance gets augmented. And that's when we freeze, or we make mistakes, or we get flustered, and people will say, well, I was fine that day, and like you're saying, it's like, no, you got to look backwards and say, what was going on? What was I telling myself? What were these other experiences that maybe caused me to have like a little bit higher of that level of anxiety or stress that then manifested in my performance? And often I tell people how you talk to yourself after something is also key, right? Are you kind to your inner child? Are you like, hey, you didn't do a great job today, but that's okay. You got this. Like, let's just look at what we did well and what we didn't, and move forward. A lot of times we kind of, I see this even with my own son. He's kind of a perfectionist in his sports, and he'll, be like, oh, well, I didn't hit that one ball. And it's like, okay, but what did you do that went well? There are a lot of things that you played well with your teammates. You were encouraging, you hit this other thing, you caught that ball. Like, there's a lot of things that go into one experience, and it's how you talk to yourself after and what you do with that, that really makes a difference. So it's kind of what you do before and looking backwards, but also, how you kind of take care of yourself after. And that to me seems like the mental health analogy is like, you don't just water the plant the day of, right? That you want it to bloom. You kind of have to do that several weeks in advance. And then once it blooms, you don't just say, oh, right, there's a flower, I don't need to do anything. You have to keep maintaining it, right? And you keep loving it and giving it care. And so kind of internally, we're like that plant.
Yeah, I think that might be the biggest misconception around mental health is that it's a kind of when I want to thing, or it's not a daily practice. I don't think we see it that way. But would you agree with that? Or you think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions around mental health?
I think it's changing. I think it depends, but I do see like more people being thoughtful. Like, I think the bullet journal was a good example in the pandemic, or people, writing their thoughts down, meditation, like 10-minute meditations, all the apps on your watches and your phones to kind of breathe. These are really valuable ways to kind of preserve mental health. And generally, you see a therapist once a week or once every 2 weeks or so, anyway. But I think that I do see like a change. I think before it was kind of like, come to therapy, 2 or 3 sessions, fix my problem, I leave, and then I don't have to maintain it. I do see that changing. I think more awareness, different generations and thoughts, and just people like you doing great podcasts like this, where you're educating people and trying to be a good role model. All of that really helps change that perspective to make this more of a daily practice or even a weekly practice, right? Even if you sat down 30 minutes on the weekend at a coffee shop, or at a park, and you said, how was my week? How do I feel? What was this like? And just do kind of an assessment. That in itself could be therapeutic, right? Or talking to a friend or a person you respect, being able to say, I had a rough week this week, and these are some of the things that went well. These are the things that didn't, and this is how I feel. all of that I think really helps that maintaining. And I do feel like generationally, it's really amazing to see how much more people are open to therapy, the concept of talking to someone, seeking mental health. I think that's great.
So, what are some of the trends that you've seen that's changed from generation to generation and time to time that you've noticed between athletes or just in general?
Well, I mean, athletes are more maybe unique in that, gosh, I think when I started my practice in my private practice and left kind of the counseling center world in 2007, I don't think any athlete was really open about their mental health and their struggles. I think that wasn't, I think it was still perceived as a weakness. And I would say that probably matched maybe half and half of the cultural value at the time or generational value. I am really amazed by the people that have been so open and willing to put themselves out there. And, I've had my own experience with someone who did that in so many thoughtful ways. And it really changed, I think, really impacted so many people to become more open, share more, seek more therapy. After it was kind of public that there was an athlete that sought out mental health treatment, I noticed a trend of other athletes seeking out mental health treatment. And I thought that that was really great, for people in professional capacities to seek that out, because I think that wasn't there before. And now I just see it more common, right? It's not so, if someone was, I see it just in my clients. If someone's like, oh yeah, I told my boss I had to go to therapy, and it's like, there was a time where people would come at lunch hours or only after work or only on the weekends because they didn't want to be seen going to therapy, or, it's just so different now. It doesn't feel as taboo.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that it's becoming like you said earlier. At that phase, it was kind of hush hush. You keep everything on the low because you don't want to be seen as crazy or weird because that was the stigma and the feeling around anything with mental health. Like even being sad was almost not acceptable to an extent. Like you can be a little sad, but all right, this put you on a time clock. Or why are you still sad at the things? And that was kind of weird space that we're in. And now it's becoming more acceptable and more um, comforting and just a little more empathetic about people's thoughts and feelings. But I think about this often. Think that do you think we're seeing an increase in people dealing with mental health situations and cases, or is it just more public? Are people just coming out more about it?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, I follow all the research, and we're also, we don't know. I think we're still unclear of like maybe how the pandemic helped or hurt mental health. So I think there's some things that were really positive. Like, for example, some people, maybe they're struggling with social anxiety, but they're really bright and smart. Working from home is probably really a big gift, right? Just being able to like really concentrate on their craft or whatever they're doing. And so we don't know. For some people, it's not so helpful, right? And it made the isolation worse. So I think you could see, um, positives and negatives. I think the one thing I notice is that, and I think this is still evolving. I think it, again, everything is like a plus or minus because social media is so great in so many ways. This isn't something I would have done even 10 years ago in this format, right? It would have had to be someone on TV and a news station, a radio station, maybe an article in the newspaper. This isn't now it's so commonplace, and it's so great because so many people have access to really positive information that they may not have received prior to the advent of so much social media. At the same time, we have some pressures that are created by social media, and we don't know all of the ways that that may impact people's body image or self perception or expectations of self. I think our adolescent population is probably at most at risk because they're not like fully formed in their like way that they process information. We're still unsure how all of this is probably going to impact. In my perspective, I always see change as always like plus or minus, right? So you're always going to have some positive growth, and you're always going to have some stuff that isn't that great. That's why I think having people in your life, mentors, coaches, connections, friends, family, a therapist, a spiritual guide, whoever is important to you is really helpful, because it's really community and like that village mentality that I do think gets people through no matter what the circumstances. I know I'm more on the neutral side for that one.
No, I understand because I go back and forth on it a lot too. Like you see different articles and things pop up about how the newer generation, they're more depressed than ever. They're having more mental cases than the generations before them. So you read that at surface level and you would think, oh, the kids are more depressed than ever. But who's to say that the generations before them, like their parents or their great grandparents, weren't just as depressed, but now we're just more aware of it. You're just seeing it. People talk about it more. 'Cause like you said, there was a stigma around it to where you wouldn't bring it up because you don't want to be perceived as weak. So now it's like, oh, it's acceptable for me to talk about this. So I think that's where the numbers come in being skewed. But at the same time, like you said, the pandemic did a lot for people. So we don't know if it's the social media plus pandemic plus whatever else going on making it be higher, or just the awareness of it, including social media, like the awareness of it making it more prevalent and more the awareness around is higher. So I'm with you. I don't know which side is right or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or which side we leaning more towards, but I feel like there's truth in both of it. Like I think it's the combination of the awareness of social media, the body imaging, the comparison game we play. In basketball, we see the comparisons of this player's ranked this and they have all these scholarships or whatever, and I don't have it yet. Or especially with ladies, the body comparisons of this Instagram model influencer, and I'm looking the way I look. So I don't know sometimes. Sometimes I want to say yes, sometimes I want to say no. So I just want to know from your perspective of what you've seen and been around that maybe you are seeing an increase in this, or maybe it's just more awareness. So I just wanted to see what, from your perspective and your lens, what you saw from that.
Yeah, I think that I agree. It's just, it's really mixed. And, I do think you're right. Like, 30, 40 years ago, there were, I just remember being a psychologist or therapist in a college counseling center, and people, kind of saying they had class, or oh, I'm meeting with the professor, and our building was kind of tucked away so you wouldn't know. But now people see each other like, oh, I saw my friend, and I was like, oh, I'm my therapist. And it's a different, it's just so different. And so I think there is some level of, we're measuring it more, we're talking about it more, we're more aware of it. At the same time, yes, there may be more kind of factors in our life that cause um, more stress. And so I think it's always evolving. And I think that's why there's probably the need for more awareness and more accessibility to, therapy in general.
So when it comes to depression, I think that I will say I do think we see more people being depressed. I think specifically when it comes to that, I think more people are depressed. But at the same time, I also think that people are trying to self-diagnose because they've read some things and they've seen YouTube videos and they're like, oh, that relates to me. And I think also some people want to, I don't want to be insensitive by saying this, but kind of playing the victim role and want to say, oh, I'm depressed and this situation is making me depressed when you might just be sad or it's not as bad as we're making it be and you can overcome it. You know what I mean? So I think depression might be the one that's a little bit higher than it used to be, but I also feel like the numbers are also skewed because people are trying to self-diagnose themselves rather than just. It's like, are you really hungry or are you just thirsty? Are you really hungry or are you just sleepy? It's like there's the outcome of what we see, but we don't realize that the input can change what the output actually is. And so I wonder sometimes, are we actually more depressed or we're just misdiagnosing what the actual outcome is? And so from your, what do you see with that one?
I think it's a mixed thing. I think that we do use these words more colloquial, right? Like people say, oh, I'm OCD, if you're clean, or you like to dress a certain way and you want everything to be put together. Or people say, I'm depressed, or, oh, she's psychotic, or, whatever, right? And we use these terms more as feelings or to describe behavior. But when we look at what a clinical depression is, we measure it based on like this holistic kind of concept I started with, which is you look over a 2 week period and you look at a constellation of different symptoms, and if you have like x amount of 5 out of 10 of these symptoms pretty consistently throughout the day for a 2 week period, and you notice that it's affecting my social relationships, my occupational health, and my general physical health or well being, well, you'll start to see that's when it's a clinical depression. So I think it's mixed, right? Like, I'm glad people are able to say, hey, I'm depressed, I'm sad. I think they're interchangeable nowadays that people say, I'm depressed, I'm sad. you know, I think that what a depression is or a depressive episode is that it's when it lingers and it's pretty much something you feel consistently, uh, generally on a daily basis, and you feel it for a long period of time. So the way that sometimes I describe it is that, like, when you're depressed, you may have your favorite meal right in front of you, the thing that you crave, that you love, that brings you, like, it's like, oh my God, I love this. This is so exciting. And you look at it and you're like, I know I love this. And you eat it and it tastes like cardboard. Your mind says, I know I love this. I should feel great. But your feelings and your body says that this just feels blah, like I could be eating nothing, like I could be eating a cracker. And that is usually what depression feels like. It's that there's certain things that make you happy, that connect, you feel connected. But when you're depressed, you don't, it's like that, but you don't feel it, and that feeling lasts for a long time. And so I think the only misconception I would say is a lot of people may, just look at like what Google says about depression, but they may not look at, like, okay, what does the American Psychological Association say? Or let me consult the even WebMD and look at all the criteria, because you don't die even in diagnosing someone. We don't diagnose someone with depression or anxiety unless they fit like a whole criteria list of, okay, this has to be there, this has to be there, this has to be there. And so I think that's just the risk, is that more people talk about it, it becomes more loose, and people don't know that, hey, there's this whole criteria. Just like, if I cough, you're not going to say, oh my gosh, you have the flu. You're going to say, it's just a cough, right? But if I'm coughing for 3, 4 days, 5 days, like me, and losing my voice, you might say, hey, something's going on, right? So that's
Yeah.
That's the, difference.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I like the cough analogy. I'm gonna
Hmm.
have to take that one.
Okay, sure, of course. It's all free
Yeah, I
game,
think.
so you can have it.
Thank you. But yeah, I like that because I think, like you said, people try to label themselves these things, and when you talk to people who truly have these things, like they got diagnosed from a doctor by this, like they actually need to take medication for these things. It's totally different from, like you said, the feeling of being sad versus actually being diagnosed with depression. Two different worlds. And I don't want to belittle anybody's issues or struggles or pain, but when you actually see someone who's depressed or is OCD or ADD, ADHD, whatever label they have, you don't want to be labeled that because that's a whole different world. Like you're thinking you're on Mercury, but it's actually over there in Venus. And I try to be respectful in saying these things because once again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or say their pain's not valid. But when you actually get around these people and see what it's like, oh, maybe I'm not as depressed as I thought I was. And I do think that we we have spectrums of it and we have
Exactly.
seasons of. So you have the very heavy case, like the clinical diagnosis of it, but then you might have a lot of case where you might have a situation happen, like a loved one dies or something happens, and you might be depressed for a moment, and you have experienced depression, but you're not a depressed person. You know what I mean? So
And we try
how
to
could you kind of
stray away from like depressed person, more like a person with depression, so that they're not their diagnosis in the sense that you don't want to define someone that way. And also, just so you know, that in the diagnostic criteria, we have, something called adjustment disorders. And those are for people who are experiencing, like you said, maybe they had a life circumstance, something happened. For example, lose a significant relationship, and for about 6 weeks you're pretty sad, you're down, maybe you're tearful, maybe you don't feel like eating, maybe you don't feel like seeing friends. That's called an adjustment disorder. And that part is just that you're adjusting. You may still have adjustment disorder with depressive symptoms or anxious symptoms or mixed. You can have that. But that's for a limited time. So sometimes we just don't understand that clinical diagnoses means you have them for a lot longer, or they're part something you go through that's cyclical. Some of us have them and they're time limited. They happen for 6 months. Maybe we shift, we go to therapy, and it doesn't happen again. So everybody is different, and we're really unique in that. And then the other thing I say is like every diagnosis is on a spectrum. And for a lot of people, having a guide, having a diagnosis can truly be a gift because it normalizes it. It says, hey, look, there's treatments for it, there's a path forward. This is what this is. You're not that. These are symptoms, they're physical symptoms, they're impacting you. Let's take care of the physical symptoms, let's take care of the emotional symptoms, and we can learn to manage this in a really, really positive, healthy way. And it becomes part of someone's identity. And that, it just is what makes us diverse human beings in general.
so would you say the labeling or titling people would be the first phase or first step of kind of helping them overcome the depression?
I would kind of avoid labeling the person. I would more say, like, the person having a path forward. It just really depends on the person, but sometimes having a diagnosis can be useful, not to put someone in a box, but more to give them a path forward and help them say, like, okay, here's how I can manage this, and here's what I can do, here's what I'm in control of, here's what my brain is in control of. When we think of any mental health disorder, a lot of times people think it's like their fault, or it's something they did or something someone else did. No, there's so many different components. I was just describing this to someone. It's like you look at all the biological and genetic components. You look at the socio-cultural components. What's your environment look like? What are the things you've been exposed to? And all of that combined has to hit a place of stress. And how we deal with that stress is really unique, and how our body deals with that stress is really unique. And so sometimes it's really this confluence of all of these things and a stressful moment in our environment that brings out these feelings, symptoms, whatever it is, however you want to look at it. And so we're all prone to this. It's just how we respond to all of these things on top of our genetic makeup and our genetic lineage, and who we are and what we're exposed to in our environment and the barriers we have. And we can list all of these components. So to me it looks like you can't just call someone a slice of the pie. You have to look at them as the whole, right? And so you look at everything. So even if someone has depression, let's say throughout their life at different points, we're also looking at like, what are all the other things you have and who are you? And this is one piece of that. And it helps you understand how to have that homeostasis that feels good for you and feels more, kind of more content. I always tell people happiness is fleeting, but most of us are looking for contentment, right? That sense of it's not that you won't be sad, it's not that you won't be disappointed or frustrated or angry. It's just that we're looking for joy and contentment. That's something kind of to achieve. It's like it's a mental kind of state. It's not like a goal, like one thing. I got it, and then I don't, it goes away.
I like that. So when I say changing the label, I mean like how you saying earlier. So somebody might say I'm a depressed person. Well, let's take that label off and just say, like you said, we're trying
Person
to
with depression.
redefine. Yeah, you just a person that has this thing. Just like I have this T-shirt on, but I'm not my T-shirt. I can take this off and put another one on. Would that kind of be like the first step you take towards like seeing it a different way? Like it's not you're not tied to this identity of what you choose to be. You can be a better person. You can be a different person. You can see yourself in a different light. Like, would that be the first step you take?
Yeah, that's a great step, right? In the process, I think one of the things I think of is, nobody says I'm a cholesterol person, right? They say I'm a person who has high cholesterol, right? And they say I have high blood pressure. Nobody says, "Hi, I'm a blood pressure person." Like you don't say that. So it's like a real strange why I don't know why we do that with mental health. And so I think that it's really important to focus on the person and know, yes, I'm a person who has anxiety issues. I'm a person who has ADHD. I'm a person who struggles with depression or depressive episodes. You're not your mental health clinical diagnosis. You're still that person. And so a lot of times when I teach the class on the DSM to master students. I always say it's the person first language, right? We use the person first language on average, unless someone says, hey, I'd prefer you to say this. uh, you use like people first and then whatever it is that they're facing, and just as a respect, right? Because when you say oh, that person's, you know oh, here's a depressed person, it's a different concept in your head than if you say, hey, this person is someone I know, and they struggle with depression. Yeah, it's semantics, but it does shift how we treat people. And so I always say people first language is kind of the best way to default.
Mm. What would you say the opposite of depression is?
Like in what way? Like clinically or
Yeah, so more clinically. So if someone is on this spectrum of being depressed, what would the opposite side of that be?
I mean, that's hard because sometimes people struggle with physical depression and they may not have the emotional depression. Sometimes they have emotional depression. It's so nuanced that I think we make an assumption that there is like a dichotomy, if that makes sense. So I would say depression on itself is on its scale, right? Sometimes I'm sad and don't feel like doing anything and don't want to get out of bed. Sometimes like that's lasts for weeks and weeks. Now that's when it's more on that spectrum, right? So I think the hard part about that is we all have those feelings, right? I think of anxiety as a good one, right? That everybody feels anxious. We're humans. We're supposed to be anxious. If we were a zebra in the wild, we should be anxious when we hear a lion roar, right? So that's normal. And the only problem is, as human beings, we use that anxiety all the time, right? We're anxious about everything. And so, but do we have like an anxiety disorder? Maybe, maybe not, right? And that's on a continuum again, because it has to affect multiple areas of our life. So I guess to me, like depression, anxiety, being distracted, procrastination, um, all of these things, are within everybody. It's just the continuum of like, that's the part that's on the spectrum for me, as opposed to, I guess I just don't view it as like, oh, there's an opposite to depression, because I have a lot of clients who struggle with depression, but they experience joy and happiness and, can be present and focused and that, but they might even just struggle with it underneath the surface and they manage it and they do a great job. So it would be really hard to say they never experience X or there's an opposite to it. If that, I hope that answers what you're asking me.
No, no, it completely makes sense. Because I do think sometimes we make things too binary, where it's either yes or no, or it's this or that, and there can be a third option, or there could be a little bit of both. Maybe it's 60% of this and 40% of that. So um, I think that really could help somebody else out to where they don't see it as I'm either depressed or I'm this or I'm that. So I think that could really help somebody out. But do you have anything else that you would like to leave any people with, any athletes, some advice or anything,
Um,
lasting words?
well, what would be helpful? You tell me.
So let's say I'm a college athlete and I'm struggling with adjusting to college, and I'm getting depressed because I'm not getting the playing time that I wanted to, and I'm struggling with figuring out how can I bring the success that I had in high school with me to college. Like, what would you say to that athlete?
So I definitely would maybe kind of explore, what went well in high school and what was good. And let's talk about how you felt, what's changed, why it's changed. Let's figure out, are there ways to kind of manage that? Can we communicate to your coach more? What are some things that you want to do internally to channel that high school self? And so a lot of times, like with athletes, I ask them to remember your most stunning game, the one that, or the time you're the happiest playing your sport. So for some people, that's like a pickup game. For some people, that's like, oh, I remember this high school game that I was like really good at. I remember that competition. I remember that feeling. And it's like, okay, let's describe to me all of those feelings. What do they look like? What do they feel like? Tell me every detail. How did you feel in that moment? Were you nervous? Were you excited? Let's describe that in detail. And then what I do is have people actually channel that. Remember that no matter what, even if you get a minute to play, I want you to channel that person, right? Channel that feeling, channel that energy into what you do. Try not to let that inner critic get in the way, because that's the part that there's a time for that. Like, you have a coach for that. You have teammates you can ask about that. There's you can watch your game later and think about all the things you didn't do well if you want. But in the moment, you want to think about what's, who are you, and that, like, the best version of yourself. The other part of this would be, if I was working with someone who is an athlete, is dealing with, like, hey, what's going on? Like, you're away from your family, it's different. It's hard for athletes. They come to college, they have all this academic pressure, but they also are like, they come from being the star to being with a bunch of stars, and that's hard, and a bunch of stars, and everybody's a gem, and that's hard. So not only are you like that academically, but you're also dealing with that as an athlete. It's a big ask of someone who's only like 18 or 17, 18, 19, right? And I think that having a support system, someone to talk to, someone to talk through, how are they managing, what are, someone to go through, like, okay, I'm nervous, how do I decompress, maybe doing a meditation, all of these things. Like, having a therapist can be really useful, because you have somewhere you can talk about whatever is causing stress, and then, use that kind of moving forward. And so I guess there's the part that you could go into the solution, but I would really kind of spend more time on, like, the person themselves.
Hopefully that can help some athlete out, wherever they're at. So,
I hope so too.
uh, yeah. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No
You fit me into
problem.
your busy schedule,
Of
so I really
course.
appreciate
No,
that.
I thank you for your patience and working with my schedule. I appreciate it. I know it wasn't easy at the end. Both my children play sports, so you can imagine how, like, the May is for me. So thanks so much for your time. And I really admire all the work you're doing. It's fantastic. I looked at I don't have social media, so I wasn't able to see everything, but whatever I could see on, like, YouTube was pretty fantastic. So thanks so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you coming on. So, well, people can't get in touch with you because you don't have social media,
No,
but
but I have a website, drsanthi.com. So it's just, usually most people call me Dr. Santhi anyway. So it's just my drsanthi.com. I'm in the process of changing my website, but it's up there if you ever need it.
all right. So, like she said, you can go to the website if you would like to work with her or just seeing her for work. So, give her, send her email something and say, hey, I heard you on the BeBall Jones podcast. You were amazing. Thank you so much. So, I appreciate you for your time. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for the viewers and listeners for tuning in. I appreciate you. So, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys. See you next time.
Okay, have a great day and have a good weekend, okay?
Yes, ma'am. You too.
Okay, bye bye.